Welcome to the Springs of Love Parent Night presentation on trust-based relational intervention. This is the recording of the presentation that we did in November 2023. We will begin with prayer and then launch right into the program. Thank you for watching.
Dear God, I thank you for the gift of this child to raise, this life to share, this mind to help mold, this body to nurture, and this spirit to enrich. Let me never betray this child's trust, dampen their hope, or discourage their dreams. Help me, dear God, to help these precious children become all you mean them to be. Let your grace and love fall on them like gentle breezes, and give them inner strength and peace and patience for the journey ahead. And Lord, I thank you for bringing all these families here today. And I ask that you give us guidance and wisdom in our parenting, and that you give all of these families some clarity and some knowledge tonight that they didn't have before. And Lord, I just ask that you help me to share the knowledge that you've given me to these families, to help them and to help them build up their children, give them strength. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'll introduce a little bit more about myself. So I am a counselor, licensed counselor here in Idaho. I have a master's degree in mental health counseling from Northwest Nazarene University, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, which is kind of the second level of licensure. And in 2018, I went down to Texas, to the Texas Christian University, and became a certified TBRI practitioner. Went through the training, and at that point, I was also being sponsored by our diocese here in Boise. Our marriage and family life director had talked to him about the concept of maybe we should take this information and make it put it into kind of a Catholic lens and teach it from a Catholic perspective. And so that's what we did. And I created some classes that we've done called Catholic Connected Parenting, and we've done it several times here in the Boise area, and possibly looking at doing them further as well. I'm working right now as a counselor at Catholic Charities of Idaho, and I worked in the past at domestic violence shelters and at an evangelical Christian agency as well. My family was a foster family from 2013 to 2020. We got into foster care because we were trying to adopt, and we got a placement of 2 kids that in the end it didn't work out after a year and a half. And so after that, we decided to just be a respite provider. So we took kids in on weekends or a week or a certain amount of times when foster families were out of town or needed a break. And we probably had 20 to 25 kids come through our house through part-time or full-time care. And now we decided to stop doing that in 2020. Now we're actually participating in a program called Safe Families for Children, which is through Lutheran Community Services. And they look kind of at trying to keep kids from getting into foster care. So they have families that voluntarily ask for help with their children, either babysitting or hosting, full-time hosting, and to try and kind of help those families before their children end up in care. So as far as my own children, I have one biological child who's now 16. And like I said, we've had lots of other children come through, and I work with children in my practice as well. This is building a domestic church is a common phrase that we use in the Catholic Church. The Pop Chacks, if you know who they are, they use that term a lot. And it's basically talking about our family. Building our family is the domestic church. And we want our, family to start with our faith, and so our foundation of this church is Jesus and our faith, of course. Now, when we're talking about these parenting classes, the walls of our church are knowledge of development. So it's important for us to understand how the brain works and stages of development and kind of what to expect of our children, so that we're not expecting too much that they can never reach, or we're not expecting enough to where they're not challenged. And so we have to understand the normal development of the brain and the normal stages of development, and then how that's affected by trauma or by children that have been through hard things. The other wall is attachment and connection. And TBRI talks a lot about this because that's the most important thing in raising foster and adopted children is connecting with them. That's one of the phrases they use is connection before correction, that we should always be trying to connect. We also look at our attachment styles and where that comes from, like what it was like for us growing up, what our parents did for us, and what kind of attachment style we had with our parents, as well as what we're kind of passing on to our children. So those are kind of the key things within this parenting class. And then the roof is empowerment. So this is empowering our children to make choices and make good decisions, empowering their bodies to know, to understand when they need food and water and those sorts of things. We'll get more into that as we go. But these are the kind of the base of our parenting classes. And then on top of that, then we learn specific discipline techniques. So we have to have this base. And when we teach the classes, we don't even get to discipline techniques until I think week 6. 6 and 7, and then 8 is putting it all together. And the reason that we do that is because this is so important that if we build it in this way, our domestic church will be stable and a good foundation. A lot of times what happens when people come to parenting classes is they want to know discipline techniques, and we don't do the other stuff. And they just want to know, what do I do in this situation? What do I do about this behavior? What do I do about this? And TBRI is one of the only parenting techniques that I know of that really is more about a philosophy of parenting and building this domestic church, building this structure. Of course, we always have to have discipline techniques, but we don't want the focus to be that. That's why we do it towards the end, because if we do this and we don't have a solid base, then, of course, we always have Jesus, but our walls will fall down and our domestic church will not be stable. So that's the reason that we kind of do it in this manner. And this is our goal in the parenting classes, to have this solid domestic church. So that's just kind of an introduction to the classes that we teach. Um, the one thing before I get into the TBRI information is I need to explain the differences. So you'll see some slides that look like this that have our little logo down at the bottom for the Diocese of Boise Marriage and Family Life Office. Those are things that I've added. So when I went to the training in Texas, they wanted us to keep the format of the TBRI information, so we didn't change the integrity of it. So you'll see kind of some differences in the slides. So they gave me permission to add information from like our Catholic perspective or other sources. So the TBRI slides you'll see will be kind of like this. They're purple and white. It has the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development on it. And this is the information mostly that's in your handout. And this just shows that I have permission as a licensed TBRI practitioner to teach this class. So I'm going to go kind of into the overview of TBRI, and then we'll watch a little video of them talking a little bit more about it. So the goals of TBRI are just to lay the foundation for deep insight into our children, to really be able to understand where they come from and why they're acting the way they are, what the behaviors are about. It creates a practical framework for being able to intervene and apply this information as well. And it enhances our understanding regarding interpreting behavior and responding appropriately. It's a holistic intervention, and the slide says it's been developed over the past decade. It's actually been a lot longer than that now. I went to the training in 2018, and it's probably been almost 2 decades. It's probably been 20 years or so since they have started this approach. And it meets the needs of the whole child. And it's an approach that's developmentally respectful, responsive to trauma, and attachment based. So you'll see as we get through here that it's, well, I'll do that in a minute once before I play the video. So where is TBRI used? It's used all over. I mean, it's obviously used in homes, in foster homes, in adoptive homes, in regular, homes with biological children. It's used as well, and it's used in schools. A lot of schools kind of use the concepts to help their children to be able to learn. It's used in residential facilities and orphanages. The people down in Texas actually used it in several troubled teens homes where they had kind of the toughest of the teens, and it was very successful. And when I was down in training, getting certified, there was actually a group of people from the juvenile justice system there as well that were getting certified to use the concepts in juvenile detention centers and prisons. So, I mean, it's an excellent way to use this information in any environment. And it's designed for children and youth of all ages and all risk levels. Even if a child was adopted at birth, it's still helpful with that. It's helpful with biological children. I've used it on my own child, and it's really helpful in all situations. So I'll play the video. What I was going to say about this is most of these videos and pictures come from summer camps that they started. Karen Purvis was the person who was a graduate student at Texas Christian University. She went back to school as an older adult and got her master's degree in child development, and she's the one who kind of spearheaded this movement. And they had these summer camps where they would bring in adopted children, and they would run the camps with the children, and they'd bring the families in sometimes. And then they started developing the theory based on what they saw at the summer camps. So it's really research-based theory. And then she also worked with some individual families in their homes. She actually went to their homes. This was in the very beginning. Of course, they don't do this anymore. But I don't think they even do the camps anymore. And Karen passed away a few years ago. But she used to go into people's actual homes. So that's what you're going to see here. And this is just kind of an overview. It's like a 5-minute video.
Does your relationship with your child feel like a series of never-ending struggles, emotional meltdowns, tantrums,
Go pick it up, please.
or uncontrollable rage?
I'm gonna cut you with a sharp knife.
How does a little kid even have this much in him and this much anger?
And it's not just anger. How can a child so young feel so much fear, pain, and sadness?
As horrible as this sounds for a 6-year-old, he almost started losing the will to live.
There's no escape. There's times of feeling of total hopelessness, absolute helplessness, and a total loss of, I know I need to be doing something, but I have no idea what it is.
It's clearly not the life you envisioned when you opened your heart and home to a child.
For parents who are trying to parent a child who's a master at controlling, a master at manipulation, it's hell on earth. It's worse than chaos.
Parents and professionals from around the world have found solutions here at the Institute of Child Development at Texas Christian University.
Because when you disarm fear,
Developmental psychologists Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross offer a unique intervention for high-risk, vulnerable children.
No, I wanted that one.
A trust-based model of parenting built on more than a decade of research and personal experience.
What do you need? What's going on with you? Can you tell me?
The program has met great success with children of all ages in the homes of foster and adoptive parents, residential treatment centers, and orphanages. Leaders in child welfare and juvenile justice systems have sought out their training. And now, in this video, Drs. Purvis and Cross will share their program with you.
Okay, now, let's start with you.
Teaching concepts
I love to lower myself into a child's field of vision.
and step-by-step skills
All right, sweetie, you've got 2 choices. My tone is a little more authoritative. My volume is a little louder.
to put you and your child on a healing path.
Do you want to give Mama goodbye loving before she goes?
I love you. Have fun today, okay? All right. Many parents that I speak to are at a place they say, I'm just too tired to keep trying. I don't even think I like this child. I may love them, but I definitely don't like them. That's okay. Forgive yourself for that. Let yourself have your feelings.
We know through our experiences that children who come from hard places, who've been traumatized, institutionalized, and so on, when they're adopted, even if they're in loving, caring homes, they still have significant problems.
Most of our kids have been afraid so long they don't even realize they're afraid anymore. It's just the state of their existence.
A child who is afraid is very often angry. A child who's sad may lash out. For adults, lots of times it doesn't make sense. We think, well, if they're sad, why don't they act sad? But that's not the way it is with children lots of times.
Doctors Purvis and Cross have coined the phrase children from hard places to describe children who have experienced a trauma that disrupted their early development.
In my many years of life, I've never seen the kind of loss and hardship that these kids have had. Most of our children have had ruptured dreams, ruptured relationships, ruptured hope, and for most of them, ruptured trust. Virtually all children who become available to foster or adopt are from hard places.
Harm can begin even before birth. Exposure to drugs, alcohol, poor diet, even a stressful pregnancy can all leave indelible scars on the developing brain.
A child who had a stressful pregnancy may be a more anxious, more fearful, more frightened child, or they may be a more aggressive child. And then early hospitalization where maybe a baby's in ICU and they can't be held or touched. That child is from a hard place.
Neglect and abuse can severely impair development, particularly during critical growth stages in early childhood.
So that's kind of an overview. They talked about in there that the first step in healing is to help, to see our children from a different perspective, to see our children from the perspective of they're hurting, that their behaviors have a reason, there's a need behind the behavior, versus believing that these children are just being willful and doing things that they're trying to make me angry kind of thing, right? That's kind of the first step. And you heard them talk a little bit about the risks in there. So these are some of the risks to children during their developing years that can cause some of these behaviors that we're seeing. Um, so difficult pregnancy obviously can cause, a lot of the growth and development of the brain happens during pregnancy. And so, if there's a mom who's under a lot of stress during the pregnancy, or experiencing domestic violence, or getting a divorce, or maybe lost a loved one during the pregnancy, or there's some sort of complication to the pregnancy, that can cause the body to be flooded with cortisol and can cause stress on the baby as well. I actually had this situation with my daughter because we had had 3 miscarriages before I was pregnant with my only biological child. And so I was very stressed out. I was very worried about what could happen. And so I'm sure that my body was flooded with cortisol during, the first few months at least. And so that can be a risk to later development and behaviors. A difficult birth, maybe the baby was born prematurely, or there were complications at the birth, and they had to be in ICU for a certain amount of time, and they weren't able to really be held or be comforted during that time. So that's a risk. Early hospitalization, like they mentioned. I know a family whose child was, um, there was complications in the birth where she basically lost oxygen multiple times, and so she was in the hospital for a long period of time. She had to go back for numerous surgeries, and any of those early things within, especially within the first 3 years of life, those can really impact the brain development and the behavior of the children, because it's not a nurturing touch, it's a medical touch, right? It's a hurting touch. Obviously we had to do it to save their life, but it still can be seen as the brain as trauma. Obviously, abuse and neglect and trauma, other traumas, are also risks. Things like natural disasters, car accidents. These are kind of what we in the counseling field call big T trauma. And there's also some little T traumas that can affect it as well. Like I mentioned, like divorce, or being in a difficult situation in my life with stress going on. So any of those things can be seen as a trauma to the child. I'm going to play one more video here. I think this is the last one. It's just a few minutes long, and this is a little bit more about brain growth, and then I'll talk a little bit more detail about the brain and what we can do about changing it.
Early trauma, in whatever form, can alter the way the brain develops and trigger changes in neurotransmitters that drive our central nervous system. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that tell our hearts to beat, our lungs to breathe, and our limbs to move. They also play a vital role in our moods, memory, even our ability to cope with stress. In children from hard places, key neurotransmitter systems can be altered in potentially harmful ways, causing behavior to spiral out of control.
When you finish
And cripple a child's ability to learn and grow.
we know that if dopamine is too high or too low, we don't get good learning. We don't get good memory. We don't get clear thinking. Help me, honey.
That's too hard.
It is hard. Too high or too low. We get aggression, violence, acting out, thinking disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenic-like behaviors, autistic-like behaviors. They have neurochemically their fingers in an electric socket. A child who has changes in his brain and his brain chemistry from early trauma won't just automatically heal. They need insightful, precise, skillful parenting. May I have a hug? Oh, I love you.
They need to be parented more like a toddler or even an infant in terms of how we are kind of on them all the time or with them all the time.
Research has shown that children from hard places can be developmentally less than half their chronological age. So a child who's 8 may act more like a 3 or 4-year-old. A 6-year-old may act more like a 2.5 or 3-year-old.
One of the greatest gifts that I would give a parent if I had the capacity was the compassion that comes with deep insight. If I look at my child's behavior compassionately, I still have to deal with it, but I can deal with it properly because I realize where that behavior was coming from. I have never seen a child that couldn't come to dramatic levels of healing, but we have to know how to guide them.
So that's why we're all here, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the brain. I'm a little bit of a brain geek, so I tried to make this pretty simple, though, for you to understand. I'm just going to talk about 3 areas of the brain. The first area of the brain is called the hippocampus. And if you've been in any kind of mental health field, you might kind of know a little bit of this, but I'm going to show you how it applies to our children. So the hippocampus is the area of the brain that's responsible for memory and learning. It's kind of like when we talk to the children about this, we call it the memory saver. So it's kind of like it takes a little picture of, the experiences that we're having, and it stores those pictures in our brain. So that's the hippocampus. And that's this blue area here highlighted in the middle. The second area of the brain that I'm going to talk about is the frontal lobe of the cortex. So the whole purple area in the top is the prefrontal cortex, but we're going to talk about specifically the front part of it, which is responsible for all of our executive functioning, so our planning, our reasoning, problem solving, all of the things that help us to make decisions and do all the things that we need to do in the daily life is done from the frontal lobe of the cortex. It's also responsible for our impulse control and our controlling our emotions and our judgment, which if you think about your kids, if they've had trouble in the beginning of their life, in the first few years of their life, and their brain has been affected, it makes sense why they don't have impulse control or why they can't control their emotions, because this part of the brain has been influenced. And with children, when we teach the children, we call this the wise leader. So this is the part of our brain that helps us to be wise and to make good decisions. And these 2 parts of the brain are the most impacted by stress. The reason is because these parts of the brain have the most cortisol receptors. So when we have cortisol that floods our body when we're stressed, these are the two parts of the brain that has the most receptors for that cortisol. And so those are the two parts of the brain that are affected the most. So those are the areas that you might see some issues with your children. Now, the last area of the brain is down here in the red, and this is the brain stem, and then back kind of behind your ears, there's some little P-shaped organs called the amygdala. And that's the part of the brain that is responsible for our heart rate, our blood pressure, our breathing, and our survival reaction. With kids, we call it the security guard. So this is the part of our brain that keeps us safe. And it's an important part of the brain. It's a good thing because we want to be safe, but it can often get stuck. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the security guard, or the amygdala, is kind of always watching the environment to see what's going on. And this is the part of our brain that's fully developed at birth. So the prefrontal cortex has all of the brain cells. When a baby's born, they have all the brain cells they will ever have. They're born with those brain cells. There's just no connections between them. So as they get older and they start to crawl and touch things and put things in their mouth, they're making those connections in the brain. And that is not developed, obviously. It continues to develop into our 20s. It's not fully developed until it's sometime in our 20s. But the brainstem and the amygdala are fully developed. So if you think about a baby when they're born, they know how to survive, right? They cry and to get their needs met because that part of the brain knows I need to survive, and they can get what they need out of that. So what happens is, this is kind of the flow of what happens in our environment. So we have sensory input. We're constantly taking in sensory input, and our amygdala is kind of scanning the environment to see, is this a safe environment or not? And if it is, then it sends that information on to the prefrontal cortex so that we can then make a conscious decision. And that's a good thing. But it's also a good thing in some situations for our amygdala to cut off that information. And so let's say you're walking through the forest and you come across a bear. Well, you don't want to be standing there going, what do I do in this situation? You want your body to automatically react, so that amygdala will cut off that information and not send it to the prefrontal cortex. And that's where we get the fight, flight, and freeze response, our survival response. So let's take a look at what this looks like in a real example. So let's say you're walking along a beach and you come upon this scene. Your brain takes in all the sensory information around you. It sees the blue ocean and the relaxing chairs. It hears the sounds of the waves, the wind blowing through the trees. It feels the sun on your face, the coolness of the shade. Maybe your toes feel the sand if you're barefooted. You might smell the ocean and the trees or flowers. So you're taking in all the senses. Your amygdala takes in all this information, and it determines, okay, I think this situation is safe. And it sends the information on to the prefrontal cortex. Obviously, this happens in milliseconds. We don't even know what's happening. And so we decide, I'm going to sit down and relax. But let's say at the last second, out jumps this angry dog, and he's snarling and growling, and his teeth are bared. He's foaming at the mouth. And this could be a very dangerous situation. And in this case, you don't want to be standing there saying, what do I do? So your brain, your amygdala, automatically cuts off that information to your prefrontal cortex and sends you directly into survival mode. So back to this chart, it goes down to this bottom part. So like we said, this is a really important part of our brain, and it's a good thing. However, when we're in times of stress, and even as adults, if we have long periods of stress where this survival mode is constantly activated, it can get stuck on where we're constantly in that fight, flight, and freeze mode. And our children who come from hard places are often in this state all the time. And they are not able to calm themselves down. They don't know how to do this. This kind of shows the window of tolerance, where when we're in our window of tolerance, we can pretty much handle anything. We might get a little stressed out or a little pressure but it doesn't bother you too much, and you're able to kind of stay in that window of tolerance. But our kids often have a much smaller window of tolerance. Like you can see the picture over here on the left says when stress and trauma shrink your window of tolerance, it doesn't take much to throw you off balance. And this is not in your handouts. This is I got from a source online, which you probably can find yourself, the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. But what happens is, like our children and even us as adults over long periods of time, our window of tolerance can get smaller. So a normal thing like a change in my routine, which normally I could handle, okay, kids, today we're not doing what we normally do, we're going to do something else, I can handle normally. But for a lot of our kids, that shoots them out of this window of tolerance because just minor things they can't handle because their window of tolerance is so small. So there's two places that they can go. They can either go up to hyperarousal, which is where they're anxious, angry, out of control, overwhelmed. And again, your body just takes over. And this is the fight or the flight mode. Usually that's I want to run away or I want to fight. Or they can jump down into the blue area, which is the hypoarousal, where they're spacey, zoned out, numb, frozen, and their body wants to shut down. Again, this can happen to us as adults as well if we're through prolonged periods of stress. Um, and so our goal in this class is to be able to open up that window of tolerance and help our children have a higher window of tolerance. We're never going to be able to get rid of all the stresses in life and all of the things that cause them to jump out of this window of tolerance, but we want them to have a bigger window so that they're not going to jump all the time, that minor changes in their schedule or things, minor irritants won't jump them out of there. And one thing to keep in mind is felt safety. So TBRI talks a lot about felt safety. And felt safety is not the same thing as knowing that somebody's safe. So, back to this back to this slide, our children might be in this fight, flight, and freeze response all the time, and we know they're safe. We're like, okay, they're in a loving, caring home. I'm taking care of them. They're not in danger, and I know that, but the child might not know that. The child might feel like they constantly have to be on guard. They constantly have to be watching the environment, surveying what's happening, because that may be the only way they survived before. And so even as if you adopted a child from birth, their brain could have been affected from being, like we talked about before, a stressful pregnancy or a stressful birth, that it could put their brain in that automatic fight, flight, and freeze response. And so felt safety is when they feel safe, not necessarily when we think they're safe. So we have to keep that in mind. So that's kind of an overview of kind of the brain development. And then we want to talk a little bit about the attachment cycle. So what's happening in the rest of the body? So this is the normal attachment cycle, and this has been developed for centuries through psychology and things that they've looked at. If you look at a newborn baby expresses their need through crying. It might be that they're hungry, that they're cold, that they have a wet diaper, that they just need to be held. So they express their need. And then there's distress. So you'll see that there's 3 different circles here. The first layer is just the distress and comfort cycle. So they cry and we come and we pick them up and we calm them down, we comfort them, and that helps them to go back into the comfort mode. But at the same time, there's 2 other layers that are happening. The second layer is the sympathetic nervous system. This is the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. You don't need to remember that. But this HPA axis gets set in utero and during the first year of life. And so if they had a stressful pregnancy or stressful birth, this HPA axis can get set on all the time. And some of these sympathetic nervous systems is activated when they're crying. And so we come again and we comfort them and we're able to calm them down, and then they go into the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the second level. The third level is the excitatory neurotransmitters and the inhibitory neurotransmitters. So the excitatory neurotransmitters are things like adrenaline or epinephrine, norepinephrine, and the inhibitory ones are things like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. And so when they're crying, these chemicals are flooding their system, and these excitatory neurotransmitters are flooding their system. When we go and we comfort them, we calm them down, we take care of whatever needs to be taken care of, then those excitatory neurotransmitters go away, and the inhibitory serotonin, dopamine, those things are activated, and it calms them down. Now, this happens thousands of times during the first year of life. And if they're in an environment with a loving caregiver that responds to the child on a regular, consistent basis, then that forms the foundation for the things you see over here in the box: trust, self-worth, self-efficacy, which is basically them having a voice. When I cry, somebody's going to come and take care of me. That helps them to know they have a voice. Also, self-regulation, being able to calm themselves down, being able to regulate their emotions. And then later, mental health is also important. So this is kind of a normal attachment cycle that happens in an environment where the child is taken care of. Now let's look at what happens when that's not the case. So if a child expresses a need, especially a newborn or infant, and it is not met, that need is not met, then that distress and the sympathetic nervous system and the excitatory neurotransmitters, all those things stay on all the time. I didn't mention this before, but it's kind of like the brain. We use this model. It actually came from Dr. Dan Siegel. He uses this model of the hand, whereas this is the brain, this is the prefrontal cortex, and inside is the amygdala, the part that's putting me into fight, flight, or freeze mode, which is exactly what's happening in this situation. And when I flip my lid, my amygdala is in control, and this part of my brain is offline. So that's the same kind of thing that's happening here, where that part of the brain and that part of the nervous system is offline, and I'm constantly in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. Now, this can happen obviously in an abusive or neglectful home, but it can also happen if maybe for whatever reason the caregiver, it could be a biological child, and maybe I was not able to respond consistently. Maybe it's a single mother who's working two jobs, and the child is in a low quality daycare where they're not getting paid attention to. Maybe the mother's dealing with postpartum depression and they're just not able to respond. Or some parents used the cry it out method when their babies were little, and just left the baby to cry. And those kinds of things can cause them to go into this kind of constant distress. And so especially if this happens during the first couple years of life, if the child expresses the need and it's not met, then they don't ever learn how to calm themselves down. And so what it happens is it may cause behavioral dysregulation, ADD, ADHD symptoms, and then later in life it can cause other mental disorders like depression, anxiety, bipolar, because this child never learned how to calm themselves down. So that's kind of the overview of what happens with a child from a hard place. And TBRI coined that term, child from hard places. And like I said, it's not necessarily just foster and adopted children. It's all those situations that we've already talked about. So where do we begin? What do we do to heal this, right? It's can be kind of sobering to hear all that information, but it's really important for us to understand where our children come from so that we can have that deep compassion and understanding first. And then what do we do to change that? So the good news is the brain is very plastic. It remains plastic throughout our lifespan, at least into our early 20s. And so it can adapt to new situations. And what this means for the child in your care is that with help, the child can learn to function in an environment of safety and love. And there are 5 major stages of brain development where the most brain development happens. Obviously, prenatal, when they're in the womb, is one of the biggest times. During the first year of life is also. The age 5 is in parentheses here because that's not typically a time when there's a lot of brain growth going on, but that is the time that most children enter school. and when a lot of their cognitive function is discovered because they're under an increased cognitive load, and so that challenges their brain, and then we're often discover things at that time. Also, age 8, 12, and 16 are times when there's a lot of things happening in the brain, and at each of these stages, caregivers often note an increase in the child's behaviors and an increase in need for support. So they may need extra support and extra help for their behaviors at these times. The teen years, I won't get into this tonight. We have a whole week on brain growth when I do the longer parenting classes, but the teen years are actually something a little different is happening. They're actually pruning and selecting in their brain. So they're kind of getting rid of stuff they don't need anymore and focusing in on specific things. But it's all times when a lot of brain growth and things is happening. So if you think back to this attachment cycle, how do we do this? How do we get them to develop trust and self-worth and self-efficacy? All these things are things that the TBRI program was developed around. That's the goal of the TBRI program, to be able to give our children these things. And the concepts that they use are broken out into 3 areas. They call it connecting, empowering, and correcting. And this is just a little graphic to show how oftentimes, most of us as parents, this is the way that we do our parenting. We spend the majority of our time correcting our children, a smaller amount of time empowering, and an even smaller amount of time connecting. And if you look, just like our house that we talked about before, this is not going to be very stable. This pyramid is going to fall over pretty easily if this is the how we're operating in our parenting. So the goal in TBRI is to flip that pyramid around and have the majority of time we spend connecting to our children and empowering our children. And if we do that, then we should have a smaller time needed for correcting. And so that's kind of the goal. So we're not going to discuss this really right now, but I want you to think about, what is your strength of these 3 things? What are you best at? Are you best at connecting, empowering your children, or correcting them? And what is maybe your weakness? And also think about how you were raised. You know, what percentage of time did your parents spend connecting with you or empowering you? What percent of time was spent correcting? You know, I think they say the research has shown that children need 3 times as many positive statements as negative. I'm not sure if that's the correct number, but they need a lot more positive statements than negative statements. And it's oftentimes flipped because it's difficult. Obviously it's difficult work to do. And so this is our goal in TBRI, to focus on connecting and empowering. So I'm going to run through the different areas that TBRI talks about. They break it down, like I said, into connecting, empowering, and correcting. The connecting strategies are mindfulness strategies and engagement strategies. And mindfulness strategies are things like examining your own past. So it's important, like we talked about before with attachment styles, to examine your past and how you were parented and how you were raised, so that you know what your triggers are. What kinds of things are going to trigger me? And maybe it's not about my child, but about something that happened to me in my past. And so that's why it's important to look at this, because a lot of times when we're in stressful situations, especially, we fall back on parenting techniques that we learned as children, the way that our parents parented us. Unless we're making a specific concerted effort to change that, we oftentimes just fall back on that. So that's a big part of the TBRI program, is looking kind of at our own past and our own, how we were parented, as well as having mindful interactions with our children. So being able to be attuned to our children and recognize signs that, oh, they're starting to get upset, and recognize it early on so we can catch it before it, the spark turns into a flame. So being mindful of the kinds of interactions we have. So that's the mindfulness strategies. The engagement strategies are really important in this program. And they're things like behavioral matching, which is just kind of, doing the same things that our children are doing, getting down on their level, looking them in the eyes. If they're sitting on the floor, we sit on the floor, finding commonalities. Oh, look, you have blue eyes and I have blue eyes. Kind of trying to come up with things that connect us, as well as nurturing touch. This is a big part of the TBRI program. So in a lot of the videos that I play in the parenting classes, they show clips from the summer camps. And Karen uses a lot of what she calls chin prompts, where she just puts her hand on the person's child's chin or on their shoulder. And even if they don't like touch, you can do a virtual chin prompt where your hand's just kind of below their chin. You're not actually touching them, but that gets their connection. So rather than yelling at our children from across the room, we go over, we take their hands, we look them in the eye, we try to have warm eyes and a more positive voice quality. These children from hard places are especially capable of catching the the tiniest little changes in our voice quality or our eyes. They can see when we have angry eyes. They can hear when we're getting upset because of what we already talked about, where their brain is constantly on that fight, flight, or freeze mode, watching the environment. And that may be how they survived in their previous home. So that's really important for us to watch what we're doing and how we're saying things to our children. And so being, present to them, looking them in the eyes. Karen also does this hands and eyes thing, which you can try with your children, where she puts her hands out and she has the child put their hands on top of their hands and looks them in the eye. And if she needs to talk to them about something, she says hands and eyes, and she has them do that, and then she tells them what she needs them to do. And that it amazingly works wonders. I don't know what it is about it, but it works really well. The last thing on this engagement strategies is playful engagement. And I added a couple slides on play because I think it is so important. And the reason is we talked about felt safety. One thing that disarms fear, if our children are in that fear state, is play. When we're playful with them, it is so important because it disarms the fear. So instead of, getting upset and yelling at them, if it's a minor thing that we can just say, "Oh, that wasn't very nice. Why don't you try that again?" In a playful voice, or as Karen says, why don't you try that again with respect? That's a way to just be playful and not, make everything a confrontation. But it's also important to play with our children, to be playful as well as to play with our children, because play builds our rapport and connection with our children. This is not in your handout. The quote, I love the quote, "Rules without rapport equals rebellion," and that comes from Dr. Gregory Popcak. It's true. I mean, our children are programmed not to listen to strangers, or we don't want them to listen to strangers. So if we don't have a good rapport with them and respect, it makes sense that the rules aren't going to work, and then we're going to get rebellion. And play is such an important part of that. It's also important for children to have unstructured play. It helps them make sense of their struggles and their worries. And just like there are stages of development in ages and stages, there's also stages of play development. So if you think about babies and toddlers, they like to experience and understand objects. That's why they're feeling, tasting, smelling, putting everything in their mouth. That's play for them. And then around preschool age, they start to explore social roles in pretend play, things like playing house or playing teacher, playing school. Around 8 years old is when they start to actually play with each other rather than just playing next to each other. And then older children learn about compromise, fairness, and friendship through play as well. So it's so important. It's also, and this information is taken from a book called Discipleship Parenting, which I'll share the book with you at the end, so you don't need to worry about it right now. This lady, Kim Cameron Smith, I think she must have been trained in TBRI because she's actually writing from a Catholic perspective. And it's an excellent book. I have everything marked in mine. But she all of this goes right along with the TBRI. And I love these quotes from her book. Our inclination to play is not only put there by God, but it reflects God in us. So being able to be playful and play with our children reflects God to them. When we surrender to play, we're anticipating not only our childlike activity on earth, we're anticipating our freedom in heaven. So it's a little bit, play is a little bit of a taste of heaven, which I love that idea. And play opens a door to a friendship with God. So it's so important. So that's why I've added a little bit extra in here on play. And if you need ideas for how to play with your children, I mean, it can be just part of your normal daily rituals or even your chores. You're doing the dishes together and you blow soap at each other or something. It can be that, or it can be structured time where you sit down and play a board game, or any kind of thing. But if you need other ideas of ways to play, you can let me know. I'll give you my information and I can send you. I have lots of handouts on play and different types of play. So that's the connecting principles: the behavioral matching, nurturing touch, warm eyes, voice quality, and playful engagement. And in my mind, this is one of the most important parts of TBRI and the most important parts of helping our children to heal. So I will go on to the empowering principles. They break the empowering principles out into physiological strategies and ecological strategies. So the physiological strategies are basically things that are for our bodies. So hydration, blood sugar, and sensory needs. And hydration is an interesting one because a lot of children from hard places are chronically dehydrated. I'm not sure why that is, but that was what the research showed when they did these TBRI camps. They actually tested things like that. And I don't know if you know this, but by the time that you feel thirsty, you've already lost a 2% loss of body weight and a 10% decline in cognitive functioning. So it's very, very important. So if our child is losing it or they feel like they're not paying attention, maybe it's that they're thirsty. Maybe they need something to drink. Maybe they need a snack. Maybe they need protein. So those are the physiological strategies, are things for the body. Some parents actually teach their children to look at the color of their urine and say, if your urine is this yellow, then you need more water. You need to drink more. Sounds weird, but it actually is helpful for kids to be able to recognize what's happening in their body and be able to get what they need. And then sensory needs is a big thing for children from hard places. A lot of children from hard places have sensory issues. And so we need to look at the different types of sensory things that we can do to help them. Children are often one or the other. They're either sensory defensive or they're sensory seeking. They can be both in different situations, but they're often one or the other. So sensory defensive behaviors, this is the kid that refuses to eat certain foods because of the textures, or doesn't want to wear clothes with tags in it, or certain clothes that doesn't feel well. They might not like hugs and kisses. They might be wiping off your kisses all the time. They might refuse to get their hands dirty and play in the mud. Or they might not like certain loud noises or bright lights, smells. If you have strong smells like candles burning or something, they might not like that. That might affect them. And these are the kids usually that don't like to spin and things like that. The sensory seeking kids are usually the ones who are constantly spinning or jumping or hanging upside down on the couch. They may frequently want, big bear hugs or like to be wrapped tightly. They might like weighted blankets or weighted vests. They might be the ones that are constantly sucking on their fingers or sucking and biting on their shirts. They might enjoy wrestling or roughhousing. They might be, bang things a lot to hear the sounds. And they benefit a lot from fidgets. So these are some ideas of some things that you can do, some simple ways to empower your children in regards to sensory. Infant toddler massage is helpful, rice buckets, sand, any kind of Play-Doh or sensory sand or anything that can help them. Fidgets, obviously we mentioned that before. I have a bunch of fidgets. You know, you have like the clicker kind of fidgets. I have all kinds of stuff here. The poppets, you know, any kind of squeeze ball kind of thing that you can get to help your children to be able to get that sensory need met, as well as physical play. You know, get them on a trampoline or, you know, one of those mini trampolines or bikes. For kids that are sensitive to sounds, maybe noise canceling headphones would be helpful. Things for chewing gum, or they even make, you know, this is a fidget, but that I got from TCU. They make some that are, you know, like rubber that they can bite to get that sensory thing if you don't want them chewing on their shirts constantly. Those are just some ideas of some ways you can get them to help meet that sensory need. And then the ecological strategies for the empowering principles are things like scaffolding, daily rituals, and transitions. Scaffolding is just a complicated term for helping our children to regulate. And it's the idea of going from when they're babies, we regulate them completely. They cry, we come, we calm them down. We are the regulation. As they get older, we work towards co-regulation, where I help them calm down, and eventually to the point where they can calm themselves down. That's scaffolding, is using all these things, use the environment to teach regulation skills. And then daily rituals, things that, you know, you do every day to connect to your children. Things like bedtime routines, you know, maybe the routine in the morning, getting ready for school, after school snack. Maybe I sit down and talk with my child for a few minutes every day after school. Those are daily rituals. And then transitions, transitioning from one activity to the next. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about transitions. It's important for you to kind of be able to watch your child to know, it's good for you to give time limits, you know, like, okay, 5 more minutes, 2 more minutes, 1 more minute till we're going to switch to the next activity. If you think about kind of the behaviors that you have in your children, probably the times that you have behaviors is mostly around transitions, getting ready for school in the morning, bedtime at night. Those are all times that can be difficult for children from hard places, because if they're not in control, then they struggle. So anytime you can, you know, give them more notice that you're going to be transitioning is good. And think about a child in your care right now in a transition that is difficult. And what is something that you could do that could help that transition go smoothly? Maybe you can use more healthy touch. Maybe you can change your voice quality or approach the situation more playfully. I know, like at bedtime transition, do you want to hop up the stairs like a bunny, or do you want to walk like a soldier? That's a playful way to get them ready for bed, rather than it's time to go to bed, time to get ready. So can you be more playful? Can you use more behavior matching? Or can I be more mindful of what things push my buttons? And when he does this, it causes me to lose it. Or is my child hungry or thirsty, or am I hungry or thirsty and that's causing me? Or are there sensory things happening in the environment, lights, sounds, smells, that are causing them to lose it? So you kind of have to be a detective and learn what's happening in your child's life, notice the patterns, notice sensory preferences. You can use a behavior diary like this to kind of write down the child's behavior, when it happened, and what the circumstances were surrounding that. This type of attunement will help you to become proactive instead of reactive. So you can kind of catch it, like I said, when it's a spark rather than a wildfire. So those are the empowering principles. So we've gone through the connecting principles, the empowering principles, and now we're going to talk about the correcting principles. And they break those out into proactive strategies and responsive strategies. And proactive strategies are things that we do when things are calm, right? We don't do this when a child is having a temper tantrum or in the midst of a problem. We do this when things are calm, they're learnings. We teach our children about things when things are calm, so that this proactively gets us ready for behaviors. So we can offer choices, appropriate choices, obviously, and it's important to offer two good choices rather than a right or wrong choice. If I tell my child, you need to get ready for bed or you're going to get a spanking. Well, those aren't really two good choices, right? And the child's never going to choose spanking. So we need to do, like I said, do you want to get your pajamas on first, or do you want to brush your teeth first? You know, the order of things is always a good choice to offer. And this takes practice. It's not easy in the beginning to know what choices to offer, but the more you practice at it, the better you'll get. Offer the choices. And this, I don't know what it is about this, but this is like magic. Put your fingers up in front of them and say, would you like to get ready? Would you like to put your pajamas on first, or would you like to brush your teeth first? There's something magical about this. I've seen it time and time again with children where they see this and it just focuses them on those choices, and they can say, oh, I want that one, or I want that one. Use this to give them choices, and make sure that you're comfortable with whatever choices you offer. You're still in charge, obviously, but giving them some of the power can help them feel in control and not try to take the control from you. And then compromises are things that, we want to teach our children to negotiate and to be able to get their own needs met. We're raising our children to become adults, to know how to negotiate and get what they need. So compromises are good. And it might feel kind of counterintuitive to be able to do this, because we might have been raised with the fact that parents are in charge. The parents are the ones that have the power. But if we can share the power with our children, then we're teaching them how to do this later in life. So if I give them those two choices and they say, oh, I don't like those choices. I want to go play my game. So you can say, well, are you asking for a compromise? Karen often teaches the kids compromise. Are you asking for a compromise? And teach them to say, yes, I'm asking for a compromise. Okay, well, what do you suggest? Well, can I play for 5 more minutes and then get ready for bed? If it's in your power to do that, by all means, do it, because then you can teach them how to compromise, and you can say, yeah, I think I'm okay with that. But as soon as that 5 minutes is up, you're going to come and get ready for bed, right? Yes. And so you come up with that agreement and you move forward. And this keeps the behavior moving forward rather than that head-to-head conflict that you want to try to avoid. Again, I said sharing power can be counterintuitive, but it really does help the children. And it teaches them that safe people listen to me. It teaches them that they have a voice. And so they don't have to try and take that power back if we're offering it to them in the beginning. And the last thing for proactive strategies is life value terms. These are just short phrases that teach certain skills. I'm going to play the video. It's only 3 minutes long. I think we have time for that, because she kind of shows some examples of doing this in the summer camps of some of these scripts that she uses. So I'm going to play this, and then we'll go on from there.
They're just simply short phrases that have great meaning.
Good eyes. Good asking. Thank you.
It's a vocabulary that honors relationships and honors a particular way of being with other people.
Gentle and kind, Abby. Let's try it again.
That's very direct, very simple, and very straightforward.
Thank you. That was nice.
Remembering again that our kids have usually trouble processing many words, so very short phrases can help our children learn to self-regulate, to modulate, and to come back online.
All right, 3 rules for Miss Karen's group. Stick. Together. No. Hurt. Have. Woo, woohoo!
Because our goal is to help teach the children the things they never learned.
Words. I love those perfect words.
Perhaps the most important lesson you want your child to learn is that she can always say what she feels and ask for her needs and wants with respect. Showing respect means not touching things, property, or people without permission.
One of the ways that we do this is by puppet play. We use puppets and the children practice scripts.
Let me see eyes. We're going to practice first with puppets how to show respect. But first we're going to practice no respect, and then we're going to practice respect.
Let the child watch as you demonstrate both the right and wrong way to act.
So like if this is the mommy puppet and she says, honey, time to go to bed, and this puppet said, no. Is that respect or no respect? No respect. What do you think, Ben? No respect, right? How about, so that's no respect, so then watch this. Honey, time to go to bed. Yes, Mother, I'm coming. Night-night. Was that respect or no respect? Respect. Respect. You're so good.
Now give the child a chance to practice the
Do
script.
you want me to be the mommy this
Here
time?
she tries it with her mother.
Chloe, clean up your room.
No.
That was
Good, not respect. Okay. And this time we're going to do it with respect, okay? It's time to clean up your room.
Okay.
Oh, give me a high five. 3 high
So
fives.
showing respect is one of the absolute fundamental principles of all human behavior. We have to show respect as well as ask for respect.
It's not okay.
I'm watching the movie.
Let's try it again with respect.
We are zero tolerance disrespect, period. If a child talks to me mouthy, I will say, try it again, buddy.
I want you to sit up now. Zane, sit up for me, please. And come here, look at my eyes. Now you're acting out just then, right? And we don't do that, do we? Because that's not respectful, is it? It's not gentle or kind. So what do you say when you act like that to somebody?
Sorry.
That's right. Will you look me in the eyes and say it, though, please?
Sorry.
Good job, buddy. That's great.
I would rather put out disrespect like a spark in the forest before it takes down 100,000 acres in flames. And so I'm going to be attentive to showing respect as a value that is core to all of life.
So you see where I got the idea of the spark and the flame from Karen. I just love that video because it gives you specific examples of how to do this, how to teach this to your children. She always starts with, if you're teaching with puppets or scripts, she teaches them to do the not good way first and then to do the correct way after that, so they can understand the difference. And these are some of the scripts that you can use in your environment, and these are all in the handout as well. So then the last thing, of course, if we do all of this stuff, all the connecting principles and the empowering principles and the proactive strategies, hopefully we're not going to need the responsive strategies much, but of course there will always be times when none of this works. And so we have to have some responsive things to do when we're in the moment, right? The reactive strategies. And I'm not going to get into a lot of this because we could do a whole week on this. But this is a term that TBRI coined, and it's called the ideal response. And it just means that our reaction to a behavior should be immediate, like within 3 seconds if possible, because they found that learning occurs best when behaviors are addressed immediately. So gone are the old days of wait till dad gets home, you're going to get in trouble. It needs to be addressed right away, and direct. And we need to be direct with our children. And that involves all those engagement strategies that we talked about, where we're getting down on their level, looking them in the eye, getting their attention, and being direct with them. And then efficient addresses all those things we just talked about, which are the phrases, use as few words as possible and a small amount of intervention that's necessary. If we over respond, we may drive our children into worse behavior. So we need to be careful with how we respond and be as efficient as possible. And then action-based is helping our children to learn the right way to do something. So telling them, we don't slam the door. That was not the right way. You don't slam the door is not telling them the correct way. So then we have them do a redo. This is a big time for redos. So, hey, that's not the way that we do that. Let's try that again. Go back and close the door the proper way. That gives them a kind of a body memory of how to do it the proper way, and they can help remember that easier. And then the last one is leveled at the behavior, not the child. Of course, we should never be saying you're a bad kid. It's always the behavior is not okay. That behavior is inappropriate. That behavior is not okay, but I will always love you and you are always okay. And so for children from hard places, self-esteem is very fragile, as we learned earlier, because of the brain influences. So caregivers must make clear that children are not defined by their behavior. Their behavior is not who they are. And so address the behavior at hand, not the child. So those are just kind of some qualities of it. And then they also have this levels of response. And this shows kind of meeting our children where they're at what level they're at, and addressing it from that stage. And if we have to escalate, then we escalate. So the first level is playful engagement. And those are things like minor misbehaviors, things like mouthing off to me or saying something inappropriate. These are some examples of some phrases you can say to be playful, and you say it with, of course, a light mood in your voice and a playful mood, things that you can kind of just ignore. I've always heard that, I don't know where this quote came from, but you get more of what you pay attention to. So if you're paying attention to a lot of the kind of annoying things they do, then they go, oh, I'm getting attention from doing this, I'm going to do more of that. So if you can ignore it, ignore it. If it's not a major thing, if it's a minor thing, if they say something with an attitude, then you can do it from a playful perspective and say, well, try that again with respect. That didn't sound very nice. Are you asking or are you telling? Are you because a lot of kids will demand something. Are you asking or telling me? Well, why don't you try asking? So these are kind of playful ways of responding. Then if the child is at a little bit higher level than that or goes to that higher level, that's where we use the choices and the compromises, and it's more structured. This is a structured engagement. So we may have to pause the situation, get on the child's level, use a more firm voice, offer the two choices, and help them have behavioral redos as well. And then once that's resolved, if you give them choices and they say, okay, I choose this, then you have them do that, and then you return to playful. So your voice becomes playful. You always want to return to playful engagement as soon as you can. Level 3 is calming engagement. So that's when the child's behavior has escalated and they need help regulating. So that's when they flip their lid, right? That's when this part of the brain's offline. And our goal is to bring that brain back down and to help them regulate. And so that's our goal in that time. It might be a time in. Timeouts are not a good idea with children from hard places because it's another abandonment. So whenever possible, have them sit near you or with you to calm themselves down. You may have to help them come up with suggestions of what to do to help them calm down. And then again, behavioral redo and return to playful engagement. The level 4 is protective engagement, and this is when the child is being violent or aggressive and they're out of control. They're a threat to themselves or someone else. The comment about seeking professional training is in regards to if you're doing foster care, you have to know kind of what is allowed within your training to do. If it's your adopted child or biological child, it might be just holding them until they calm down enough that they're not harming themselves. So the goal at this stage is just to keep them and others safe. So those are the levels of response, and to keep in mind that when it's over, it's over. We want to try and stay connected to them, and after a behavior episode, we want to be more connected and have the behavior changed. So that's kind of the goal of those levels of response. Again, I can't go into a lot of detail on that in a short class like this, but there's more information in some of the resources. So there's a success story. I don't have time to play it, but maybe I can have Kimberly email this to you, or we can type it in the chat, or you could just go to YouTube and search for TBRI portrait. The Christensen family is that family you saw in there with Chloe, the little girl that was adopted from China. And they followed her years later, and there's a video of kind of their success story of how that class helped them, which I thought was excellent. Gives a lot of hope to parents. So some additional resources. This is the discipleship parenting book I was talking about from Kim Cameron Smith. This is not in your handout, so if you want to write this name down, it's this book that I have up here, Planting the Seeds of Faith. Excellent, excellent book. I would highly recommend. And then The Connected Child. So the discipleship parenting book is not necessarily written for foster and adoptive families. It's just written for more general, but it's written from a Catholic perspective. The Connected Child is Karen Purvis's book. That's this one up here. And that is written specifically for foster and adoptive families from a secular perspective. So you kind of have different resources. They also have a Christian arm called Empowered to Connect, and they have a lot of faith-based resources. If you search online for Empowered to Connect, there's a website and a lot of videos actually if you go to YouTube. A lot of the videos you saw in this PowerPoint presentation are from a series called Healing Families DVDs. that TCU puts out, and I just saw that they are discontinuing these. So once they're gone if you want actual DVDs, but they do have them electronically as well, that you can buy and download from their website. So they're stopping making the DVDs themselves. But you can also go to YouTube, and there's a lot of different videos out there on TBRI or ETC, the Empowered to Connect. So you can go out to YouTube and search a certain topic, TBRI and lying, and it'll pull up a video about lying or stealing or different things that they've put out there. So there's a lot of resources, free resources you can find out there as well. And then I also wanted to mention the Empowered to Connect people do a conference every year called the Show Hope Conference. It was actually started by Stephen Curtis Chapman, if you know who he is, a Christian artist, and they've adopted several girls from China, and they started this Show Hope conference, and it's excellent. This is how I first found out about TBRI, by attending one of these conferences. If you're doing foster care, you might talk to your agency, because I know here in Boise they paid for a lot of us to go to the class, and it's very inexpensive. Or you can have your church can host the conference itself, and it's a live stream conference, and so you can search for that, or this is the link for that as well. That's actually a really common question, because so many schools are not really um, are not really centered around TBRI principles. And so there's some information. I think I have an article on that maybe we can send out, that talks about how to talk to your teacher about these concepts, or how to talk to the school about the concepts. And it's difficult because, if you're in a school that has an IEP program, they can develop some special skills for the kids and ways of regulating and learning. Maybe there's something in the environment that's causing the behavior. But if they're in a Catholic school, they might not have those resources. But if you do have the ability to have an IEP meeting, or have a meeting with the teachers or the administrators, the school counselor, to talk about some techniques, to share this information with them. There's a lot of schools who have actually developed, like we were talking about, the flipping the lid thing. I know of some schools who use that as on a daily basis, and they'll ask the kids, okay, where's your lid today? And everybody does where their lid is at. And so they know which kid needs a little bit of extra help. Maybe they're kind of starting to flip, or maybe they've fully flipped. And there's schools that use this kind of information, or they might have a calm down corner. When they know that a child is about to lose it, they can send the child to the calm down corner, or go out and do a obstacle course in the hallway, or things like that. Those are excellent ways to help children when they're in school. So obviously you can't, be the disciplinarian when they're in school, but sharing this information with the schools, I think, would be helpful. Hopefully that helped answer. Kimberly was mentioning the nurture groups, and we do that when we do parenting classes in person. There are parts of the nurture group that the goal is to learn, for the children to learn how to give care, receive care, and negotiate their needs, and become autonomous. And so those are the 4 goals. And some of the things that we do in there are like feeding exercises, where we take turns feeding each other, and we ask permission. Can I feed you? And we might have a piece of fruit or a piece of candy or something on a spoon, and we say, can I feed you? And they have the right to say, no, I want to do it myself, as long as they use good words. But it depends on where the child's at. I know we had a baby who came to us at like 10 months old, and he would not let us hold the bottle for him. There was absolutely no trust. He had like a death grip on his bottle, and we had to slowly learn to, I can't just take that away. So I would put my hand on top of his, and then slowly try to kind of get my hand underneath, and then eventually let me hold the bottle. I mean, it's like children really have to be fully dependent on us in order to be independent later in life. And so any of those kind of skills, even if they're older, like you saw in the video, children are often emotionally a lot younger. And so, holding a 5-year-old like a baby, and talking to them like a baby. We had to do that a lot because if they were neglected and they didn't get that, they didn't get that baby talk that we give babies. And so we hold a 5-year-old and talk to him like a baby. Oh, you're so cute. I love you so much. Any of those kinds of things, any kind of healthy touch that you can give them, massage if they're comfortable with that, shoulder touches, just getting down in front of them and that eye contact and all those engagement strategies that we talked about would be really helpful towards building trust. Of course, if you can find somebody who's a TBRI practitioner, that would be ideal. And they do have on their website, there is a TBRI practitioner database, and you can search it and find a TBRI practitioners in your area. If there aren't any, then finding counselors that do play therapy is really helpful. If they've been trained in any of the play therapy theories, that's helpful as well. A lot of this information in the nurture groups and things have been taken from play therapy activities. And so if you can find somebody that's kind of, certified in those things, as far as the age, it really can be any age. Primarily, when I work with kids, it's primarily like 4 or 5 years old and up, mostly because they're kind of at the place where they can grasp things and work their issues out through play. Play is kind of the language of a child, and so it's a lot easier for a child to talk about what happened to them using puppets or these dolls in this house than to sit and say, "Oh, this happened to me." But they'll act out situations that happened in play therapy. So play therapy is really important. There are counselors who do like younger as well. I know when we had our 1-year-old child, we went to a attachment therapist, and that's what called herself. She had extra training in attachment therapy, and she worked on us attaching with each other, the baby and I attaching. And so there's attachment therapists who focus on that as well. And you can go, usually, if it's under 4, it'll usually be with a parent or a guardian. And so you'll go together and you can do filial therapy, which is like a parent and a child, again, learning to attach to each other, learning how to do that attachment dance. So, I mean, really any age is helpful, but problems are usually discovered at school age, which is why most children are like 5 and up. But I think it's helpful at any time if you feel like the behaviors are out of control. I think chiropractors can be helpful. I think occupational therapists, physical therapists as well. I know a lot of foster children, adopted children see occupational therapists, and they work a lot with sensory issues. So any kind of, not just counseling, but any kind of professional like that that can help a child to heal from those things is helpful. What I've found with people who have taken my classes is even at 8-week class, it's hard to grasp all the information and put it into practice. So don't be too hard on yourself. Like you're not going to be able to take this and immediately implement it. Look for further research and further information. Use some of those resources that I sent you, because it really takes hearing it over and over and over again to be able to put it into practice and use it with your children. So be gentle with yourself and don't expect too much just based on this one class.
Wow. But there's definitely possibilities of doing more. So let us know, so, all right. Well, thank you so much. And, yeah, God bless all of you for coming, and please, stay in touch. And, let's just end with a quick prayer. Okay. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you, Lord, so much for this time together, for bringing us together, for all the beautiful insights that we've learned from Jody. And we just pray for our children, Lord. Just bless them, protect them, heal them, Jesus. You know that the trauma that they've experienced, Lord, and our hearts just hurt so much and just that desire we have to really help our children, Lord. So give us your heart for our children. Give us your insight. help guide us as we parent and love these children, and just attach us more and more to our children and help them to attach with us. And we pray for those who are opening their hearts to foster and adopt, Lord, that you bring the children to them that you have for them, and give them trust and hope and faith in you, Lord, that you will guide us every step of the way, and help build our community, and build all that we are doing, Lord, and let it all be for your glory. And thank you for all, Lord. We love you. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.